Welcome to Philanthropy in Action, where we engage philanthropists, activists, students, and the community in discussions on how we use our time, talent, and treasure to change the world. I am Maxim Thorne, and I teach Philanthropy in Action at Yale University. Today's guest is Liesel Pritzker Simmons, who has committed herself to innovative philanthropy. Thank you for being here, Liesel.
Thank you.
Liesel is doing very important work in Ghana, and her life reflects a very involved life with philanthropy. We also have our Yale University students who are joining our conversation. Welcome to the show. Please introduce yourselves. Linda.
My name is Linda Lai. I am a junior history major, and I come from Shanghai, China.
My name is Dan Terza. I'm from Chicago, Illinois, studying psychology.
My name's Leslie Bull. I'm studying international development, and I'm from Washington, D.C.
Hi, my name is McLean Ritzel. I'm from Larkspur, Colorado, and I'm studying art history.
Hi, I'm Stephen Banks. I'm from Detroit, Michigan, and I'm studying computer science.
My name is Michael Schulzen. I'm a senior from Chattanooga, Tennessee, and I'm studying religion.
Thank you. Liesel, I'm so glad you're here because you have a life that so many of us would long to have. You have been accomplished in many different fields. How did you make the choices you have made to use your time, your talent, and treasure to do the things that you're now doing to make the world a better place?
Well, I think that it really kind of isn't a choice. I think if you are a committed member of society and you understand the influence that you can have, and you feel responsible to, fight injustices or to really try to fight for equality, then you don't really have a choice but to engage. And I guess I feel that I was so lucky to be born in this position where, I have food to eat, I have clean water to drink, I have a community of people that support me. And so why not use that amazing base to try to make more people in that position, I suppose?
I'd like to talk about that a little bit. We've had other conversations with people who did not come to embracing the particular position that they're in, where they could be a wealth holder, where they have a platform in media, where they didn't have any of the tools that you have, that you're comfortable in embracing. What was it in your background, do you think, that allowed you to take on these challenges so young?
Well, it was tricky. I mean, it was kind of a conscious choice because, not to kind of like dwell on this too much, but it's a little weird when you realize at an early age that you have a lot of wealth and that people are associating you with that. And I see a lot of people in my peer group struggle with that, and they don't it's almost like the secret that they want to hide. And I just think that's unproductive. I understand it, but it's not productive. And so why not kind of embrace that and say, okay, well, what can I do with this situation instead of running away from it? But I think that that's actually, it's not an easy choice necessarily, because you always want to be identifying with, opportunities that you don't have as opposed to taking advantage of the ones that you do. And I think also for young people sometimes to say, I'm a full-time philanthropist. So a philanthropist makes you you don't want to be considered a socialite.
Right.
And so that's also, I think, a little bit tricky. And so if you don't want to be considered a socialite, then don't do socialitic philanthropy. Do it the way you want to do it, I think.
I think that's such a great framing of that question, because when we, as the class, began talking about this, people are comfortable talking about their home life, their religion, their intimate relations, their boyfriends or girlfriends, but very uncomfortable of talking about money. And I often wonder how we can overcome that barrier, Because I think if we got people to own the position and the opportunities that those positions give them, then we could actually begin to engage more fully in creating change.
Yeah, I think that, I also think though that perhaps because there's so much information available to people today that's going to be less and less of an issue. So the thing is, you can Google me and find my net worth somewhere out there, and I know that. And so the thing is I have less incentive to run away from that because people are going to find it out anyway.
Right.
You know, so why not then take control of what you're doing with that information? So directing people towards, okay, no, it's not just that, look, here's, you know, a young rich girl, but these are some interesting issues that money is addressing. And so you can actually use that to call attention to issue areas that you're passionate about.
Linda, I know that you are passionate about a number of things. Please go ahead.
I am a huge fan of The Little Princess. I cried and cried and cried for most of the movie. But it's great to see that The Little Princess is going to be a successful woman in the field of philanthropy. And I would like to focus on that in terms of how do you invest your treasure. So you are a talented actress and your hobby is theater. I was wondering how do these interests translate into your work in philanthropy, and how have the skill sets you've developed in these sectors helped you in the philanthropic sector?
That is an excellent question. I think because I've thought about that a lot, because I've stopped acting professionally now, but there's a lot that I've learned from my training as an actor that really does translate. So one of the best lessons that I was taught in terms of acting is whenever you approach a scene and whenever you approach, you know, your relationship with the other character, always ask yourself, how do you want to make the other person feel? That directs your intention and your objective for that scene. So how are you trying to make that person feel right then and there? And the thing is, I think that that's actually a better life question. So when you walk into any situation and when you see someone, whether or not they look like you or whether or not they're from the same place or whether they have, you know, 2 legs or are living in a refugee camp, how do you want to make them feel? And where I think philanthropy then takes it a step further and development takes it a step further from theater is not only how do you want to make them feel in this scene, but what about them in 10 years? What about them in 20 years? And so development is also about answering that question as well. But I think that kind of, and I don't want to say empathy because it's a little bit different than empathy, but that thought process absolutely informs my philanthropy.
Well, that's great. No, I am also a big fan of A Little Princess, and I was looking through your bios, like you said, you can Google your name, and it's relatively easy to find some great information. It's really phenomenal what you've done at such a young age. And I was really interested in in your philanthropic efforts, and I found a little bit of information on young ambassadors for opportunity, and I thought that was a really great program. And there wasn't a lot of information online, but I did want to ask you a little bit more about that because I think in this day and age, it seems with this overpopulated planet, and it almost is a little bit. I find it more. It's more challenging to become a leader in your community, and I think with with the new digital media age, there's more opportunities for that. But I think it's almost difficult to make a name for yourself and lead your community. And I was just really interested in how you've expanded that program and what you advise for us and how we can be leaders in our own communities.
Yeah, I think so. The Young Ambassadors for Opportunity actually started while I was in college, and I became involved with an organization called Opportunity International, which is a microfinance network, and they're awesome. They do really fantastic work, very innovative stuff, and our foundation is partnered with them on a program that we have in Ghana. But I went to a conference, an Opportunity International conference, as a potential donor. And I liked everything I was seeing, and then I learned a lot more in depth about their microfinance programs, and then I went back to college and was telling all my friends about it, and they were like, wow, this sounds really cool, like how do we get involved? And I was like, well, there's no way, like they're not really interested in like the mass market donor or donor engagement from the American end. They're really interested in getting like $1 million check from Gates Foundation or from USAID or from like a whale donor, as they say. And I went to Opportunity International and I said, well, that doesn't make any sense. Look, my friends, maybe they can't write, most of them can't write a check like I can write, but you should tell them about what you're doing. These are future senators. These are future leaders of businesses. These are future, they should know what economic development is at the grassroots level in countries that are developing rapidly. And you have an opportunity to do that. So we started the Young Ambassadors for Opportunity as kind of an education network about how microfinance works. And it was right around the time when Muhammad Yunus won the Nobel Peace Prize, and so there was a lot of conversation about microfinance and also a lot of misconceptions that it was sort of like the silver bullet, which isn't true. It's one of many tools that are necessary for economic development. So anyway, we started the Young Ambassadors, and we started with a national board, and then what we did was really decentralized it. So each city kind of has their own chapter, and they can set their own agenda, but with some oversight from the national board and then within the organization. We set it up that way because we wanted to create opportunities for leaders in each of those places, because we recognized that our constituency, which is mostly 20-somethings, wanted those leadership opportunities. And so instead of just having one national board and a ton of members, we really have a lot of leaders at the local level that can set their own agenda. So I think that that's creating leadership opportunities within organizations gives people something, it helps engagement. So that's how we structured that one, and it's been good also, because then over the last few years I've kind of stepped down from, like, I'm cycling off the board this year because now it's formed and it's time for someone else to take it over and bring some fresh ideas to it.
Liesel, tell us about the structure of your foundation and some of the interesting dynamics, because in your foundation, you share leadership with your mother. How does that work?
Have any of you worked with your parents before in any official capacity? Because it's rewarding and challenging, like, at the same time. So what we did was, in 2008, I decided, a few years earlier, I kind of took control of my wealth, and I decided to take $50 million and set up a foundation. And at that time, I didn't really feel like I had the skill set to lead that and kind of manage that. And it's something, I mean, my mom is a passionate philanthropist as well. So she is technically the president of the foundation, and I'm the vice president. But we really work together on setting the vision and the mission and the strategy for the foundation. But what I kind of like about that is that I myself am getting some leadership development training, because I've never run a foundation before, and so at least working at, I think it's also important not only to be a leader, but create development opportunities for you as well, because you should always constantly be learning. So when we set it up that way, the goal is in 10 years or so, or whatever, less than that, whenever my mom decides to step down, that I will then run the foundation. But I've liked actually being in that number 2 position for these early years, because I'm learning a lot.
Dan?
So some of the organizations that I think you've worked with have been using microfinance to fund low-cost schools in Ghana. Can you tell us a little bit more about that, and if you think that there are other kinds of institutions that microfinance could partner with synergistically that way in the future?
That's a great question. So our program that we are working on in Ghana is basically using microfinance and microfinance products to improve schools. And so we work with this kind of little-known sector of these low-cost private schools that actually focus on deprived communities. So where there either is no government school, or the government school is too far away, or it's overcrowded. Members of the community just sort of set up their own school, and they charge an affordable tuition to the parents. These are basically not-for-profit schools. And so there are some for-profit schools, but we focus on not-for-profit schools. And then, they use that tuition to pay the teachers and run the school. But technically, they're a business. And so, like any business, they might need a loan to grow, because even though they're schools, they don't get any government support because they're technically private. So what we partnered with an MFI in Ghana to try to create a program that would make it easier to lend to these schools, because microfinance institutions tend not to like to lend to schools. They're tricky loan clients. They don't fit well in a group lending model, all of these reasons. And so we developed and then tested these different loan products. And so there are things like a lot of proprietors want a loan to buy a school bus so that they can transport the children. They can get further out and get kids in more rural areas, so it increases their enrollment. And then they can also rent that bus out during the school day, so it's an income-generating activity for the school as well. And what we liked about using microfinance is when you go into these regions, extremely rural areas in sub-Saharan Africa, you can get, microfinance can go there. A lot of other interventions can't really go very deep and very far, but when you have a loan officer looking over their loan portfolio and their school is in that loan portfolio, they're going to go and monitor that school. They're going to tell you if teachers aren't showing up. They're going to tell you because if the school can't repay the loan, it's on their back. So that basically that feedback mechanism of microfinance is very well managed, much better managed than the government circulating amongst the schools. And so we thought, well, let's use that delivery method to bring some better education into the schools as well. But there have been...
Did you find that people were surprised that there are private schools for lower income folks operating in Africa as a model?
It's been such an uphill battle to explain this sector to people, because as soon as you say the word private school, particularly to somebody from the West, immediately they don't want to hear about it. They're like, nope, school. And the other thing is that the big debate is, is free education a right? And we can, sure, okay, it's a right, but who's going to pay for that, actually? Somebody's got to pay for it. It's either our tax dollars, or coming. So what's the better question is not should education be free, but what is the most cost-efficient form of education? And there have been studies that show that these low-cost private schools are cheaper per student for the same quality of education as the government-run schools. And so if that's true, then let's use that delivery method, or some hybrid partnership of a public-private education model.
The interesting thing that I find, especially if Americans are surprised by private education in Africa or in these developing countries forming this transformative space or opportunity, is surprising to me. So one of the areas of my research is how American philanthropy transformed the space for African Americans. From the slavery period, the antebellum South, Reconstruction, during Jim Crow, post-Jim Crow, and that we've actually seen in the United States how philanthropists, through private institutions, because public opportunities weren't there for a lot of African Americans and people of color, or if they were there, they weren't open to African Americans. And so Spelman and Morehouse and any number, or the Rosenwald family, that created the thousands of schools for African Americans. Why do you think there is that gap in knowledge of what we know we've done, but it's so different when you're applying to a continent like Africa? Why do you think there's that dissonance?
You mean between, specifically with private schools?
Yes, or I think especially private schools, since that's one of your focus areas.
I think one problem is just what the paradigm has been around international development. It's for 60 years, the development agencies have been saying, no, let's strengthen and build capacity within the governments, make these governments really big and strong and powerful so that then they can deliver these services to the people. And there hasn't been as much of a focus, I think, on these development agencies and the private sector. So they're kind of siloed, I find.
Do you think that's a generational thing? Do you find that debate between yourself and your mother, for example, reflected in that?
Well, she's very much a private sector, she's sort of almost anti-government. But yeah, I mean, I think that that's certainly a topical debate. I mean, this year, how big should government be? What services should it provide? And what services is it capable of providing as well? And it's interesting, but I do find, even in my own politics, sometimes a divorce between what I would be recommending to the Minister of Education in Ghana and then what I expect of our own American system here.
Right.
So, yeah, I think it's just years and years and years of expecting that government should provide everything, and now people are saying, maybe not, actually. Maybe there are better actors in certain areas. Yeah.
Stephen?
So you mentioned that you entered philanthropy because you felt a responsibility. How would you recommend engaging potential donors who don't feel that responsibility?
That's a tough one. I think that some people really feel that it's either not their responsibility, or also something that I hear a lot is, well, no, I need to make my money now, and then I'll give it away once we take the tech company public, And I think maybe a good way to engage those kind of reluctant potential donors is storytelling. If you can engage them with an individual whose life could be changed because they did decide to feel responsible, or they did decide to be empathetic, I think I've found that to be the most effective appeal. Bringing it to a one-on-one level. Sometimes people get really overwhelmed by big statistics, and and they say, well, great, so my $5,000 is going to be a drop in the bucket. I'm not going to solve sex trafficking, but bring it down to almost the starfish metaphor, right? Of well, you saved that one starfish. So, yeah.
So do you think it really is a moral responsibility that they're ignoring, or are they correct in saying that they can choose to not have that responsibility or to not feel that responsibility?
I believe it is. I think it's a moral imperative, personally, because we are a community of people. We need to help each other. You don't, if you're alone on an island, you will die. And so I think that it's just completely against every human instinct to deny helping somebody else. I mean, what do you think? Do you think that it's a moral responsibility, or do you think it's a choice?
I don't know. I study moral philosophy a bit, and there's this question of whether there is an objective morality or not. And I don't have the answer to that yet.
Mm-hmm.
I doubt that I will. But it's a good question.
So you got married to the handsome and sophisticated Ian Simmons.
I did.
Did you have these conversations with him?
Yeah. So the thing is something that we did. We actually did this right after we got married. Was we created a family mission statement and kind of sat down. It was actually lovely. Like, we got the fire going, we had a bottle of wine, and it like sat there, and it was great. Like, culled through the library. We had John Rawls out. We had Amartya Sen. We had all of our, we totally dorked out, basically, and really thought about, okay, well, what is it that we feel as a family? So now we're a unit. We're married. And what is it? How do we want to conduct ourselves? How do we want to interact with the world? And so we made this mission statement, and then, based on this, how do we want to invest our money? Based on this, how do we want to give our dollars and give of our time? And so, yeah, that is absolutely. It's a very active conversation, I think, and it helps with framing your philanthropy. So that it's not just like, I'll give everything to everybody, like you kind of then can focus it and you can say, well, no, these are the things that I really do believe that I can have an impact at. And these are the reasons that I feel that way. So I think that kind of dialogue is so healthy to have, and always be changing it too and questioning it.
Leslie?
So this actually ties perfectly into what I wanted to ask you. So since you think that the wealthy, or maybe everyone, has a moral obligation to give back to society, one of the debates that came up in our class is whether society can just encourage the wealthy to give their money back, or whether it would be morally okay to have something like the government forcing the wealthy to give back, say, after they die. What are your thoughts on that?
I think that I would tend to keep the government out of it, because by definition then it will get political, right? So and I think the politics of giving is a bit rocky and something I struggle with personally. So I think that I'm absolutely in favor of raising taxes on the wealthy, and in that way contributing to government resources and civil society development. But I think that forcing like a philanthropy tax or something like that on somebody's death, I'm not sure that would be an effective use of those dollars, because would that person then, would the person be allowed to say where it goes to? Or they would just have to give, 5% or something to any charitable cause?
I mean, you can set it up either way. We talked about both scenarios in class, and whether one would be more acceptable than the other, or whether neither is acceptable.
What do you think?
I'm not a huge fan of the idea, in part because I think it would be great if everyone was giving. But I don't think you can legislate people into being good people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's a good point. It's forcing somebody to have a belief that you want them to have, and that's not American. It's not how we do it, right? Supposedly. Yes.
Michael?
So kind of combining this philosophical turn that we seem to have taken with the practical work that you do, how did you decide to look abroad as one focus of your philanthropy versus things closer to home?
I get asked that a lot, and it's a good question, because honestly, I can tell you much more about the education system in Ghana than I can about New York City public schools, which is where I live. And the reason really is kind of by circumstance. So one thing that I was actually volunteering in Tanzania, and I met my mother in Ghana because we'd heard that Opportunity International was just kind of beginning to lend to schools. They weren't sure how to do it. Or kind of what the problem was, we were just forming the foundation. And so we met up in Ghana and started just kind of asking lots of questions, and saw this opportunity, that there was a gap here in this market that microfinance institutions couldn't figure out how to lend to schools, and schools couldn't figure out how to manage themselves well enough to get these loans. So there was an opportunity there to create a program, and that's really why we ended up there. So it wasn't something where we said, here's this idea, where should we go? We found it in the communities that we ended up working in, and now we're looking at replicating that program in other places.
Is your value added, as you see it, that you are able to, one, take greater risks, and two, find these gaps? So you are, in a sense, not investing in what is actually already happening wherever it's happening, but that you're seeking out spaces that you can have an impact and leave a mark. Are those two things operating at the same time?
Yeah, so I think that, and it's interesting, this is always a debate that I have with myself of, wanting to be a leader and leave a mark, but then also something that I think that people don't do enough of is be a good joiner. Like, there should be awards for best middle management, and because there are, and I think a lot of areas suffer from too many people, and you touched on this a little bit before, too many people starting things instead of kind of trying to join or strengthen the whole community. And so we do at the foundation both. So like this program we've developed, but with partners. So we're not going to start a microfinance institution that do this. We'll partner with one that already does. And then there are some grants that we make that are honestly writing a check to a great organization so that they can continue to do their work. And we say, send us your report and we'll see you in a year. So I think it's important to do both. To develop a program, particularly in issue areas that you really care about, so efficient models for education. And then if it's something that's wonderful, like Parkinson's disease research, I cannot add to that into that field at all, except with treasure. And so, you just look at it, I think, case by case.
And McLean?
Yes, I have a question kind of along those lines, but I was curious. Are a couple of questions. First, are you considering raising a family in the coming years?
Yeah.
Okay. And we earlier on this semester we studied Warren Buffett and that the dynasty of the Buffetts, and I really wanted to ask you if with your treasure and with your experience and with your inheritance as well, what would you do for because when the Buffetts he will not be having his children inherit very much money, and so I was curious, what would you do for your children? Would you want them to create a life of their own and build their dynasty, or would and donate most of your treasure to philanthropic means, or would you want to pass on a large chunk of your treasure to your children to build a foundation, or what kind of is your goal for
That's, and we're like, right, I'm sure Ian's smiling over there. We're completely like having these conversations. And I think that the first and most important thing, and this is one thing that I love with working with my mom, is the best thing that kids can inherit is the moral compass kind of that your parents give you, and your sense, your worldview kind of. Obviously it's your own worldview, but it's very much shaped by what your parents tell you and teach you. And so that I think is what we want to emphasize in our family, is that create a culture of inquiry, create a culture of responsibility, but not of pressure around those things, because I don't think, like if my children don't grow up to be philanthropists, that's perfectly fine, and they should grow up to be whoever they want to be. And so I'm not sure that it's a good idea to embed in a financial plan kind of almost like you shall run a foundation and it shall be involved in strategic philanthropy and like, you know what I mean? So I think that it's an ongoing dialogue, but the first thing I think that we plan on doing is involving our kids in our giving. So what are the things that they care about? How can they see that engaging in these causes can make a difference? I think that's important.
Do you think that being a woman in this space, throughout the field of philanthropy, we hear of, Mr. Carnegie and Mr. Rockefeller and Mr. Gates and Mr. Buffett. Has that played a role in how you approach these questions?
It's interesting. I almost feel like a little bit opposite on that. Like there's something sort of soft touch about the philanthropy space, like something sort of feminine about charity and giving in a way that is funny because the founders of all of these foundations were men. But I've often felt a little bit of a pressure to like butch up my conversation with like metrics and, we've got to be very measurable around it instead of talking about, children's faces and things like that. And so I've almost felt a little that there's something quite feminine about philanthropy in a funny way because as you rightly point out, most of the contributors financially to the space have been men. I don't know. That might just be the marketing around it. That we're moving from, Sally Struthers, with children in the street to, Muhammad Yunus in economics. So.
Well, I think you're a wonderful addition to this space, and couldn't thank you enough for sharing your insights, how you approach philanthropy, how you've engaged with Ian and your mom, all the things that we are grappling with in this class. The class, by the way, is in a few weeks giving away $100,000.
That's so cool.
And they are empowered to make those decisions. And so it's wonderful to have your perspective, which is so highly relevant to what they're doing. This has been a wonderful conversation with Liesel Pritzker. She shared so much with us and inspired me, and I can see from the faces of our students, inspired the students as well. She's passionately talked about the challenge between the cold economic metrics and the smiles on children's faces. And it makes me wonder, what are you doing to make the world a better place?